The gunshot cracked through the air before the little girl even realized her body had launched itself forward. One moment she stood frozen on the sidewalk, brown eyes wide as dinner plates, and the next this tiny 9-year-old frame slammed into Jackson's steel hard enough to knock a man his size off balance. The bullet meant for his chest tore through her shoulder, instead spinning her slight body like a rag doll before gravity claimed her. Blood bloomed dark against purple fabric, spreading fast across cotton that had been cleaned 30 seconds ago. The girl hit asphalt with a sound that punched the air from Jackson's lungs, not the crack of bone, but something worse, something final, the wet slap of flesh meeting concrete with nothing left to cushion the fall. He dropped so hard his kneecaps screamed protest. His hands scarred and tattooed and far too large for gentleness pressed against the wound swallowing her shoulder. Warmth flooded between his fingers, pulsing with each heartbeat, too much blood leaving too fast. Her eyes fluttered behind lids going translucent, and for one terrible second, he watched life decide whether to stay or go. She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't call for her mama standing 6 feet away with a grocery bag spilling apples across dirty pavement. Instead, the kid leaned close enough. He felt her breath ghost across his bearded jaw and whispered 3 words that would haunt him forever. "Take care of mommy." Then her eyes rolled back and the world tilted sideways. Jackson had seen men die. 31 years riding with the HELLS Angels taught him death came in all flavors, quick and merciful, slow and screaming, and everything brutal in between. He'd watched brothers bleed out on highway shoulders while sirens wailed too far away. Held dying men who whispered final messages for wives and children they'd never see again. Learned the exact moment breath stopped, and something indefinable left human eyes. But he'd never held a child while life drained into gutter water mixed with motor oil and last week's rain. Never felt that particular species of helpless that comes from knowing your choices, your enemies, your entire goddamn existence just stole innocence from the world. His father had been right after all. The thought arrived unbidden sharp as the guilt carving tunnels through his chest. Jackson Steele Sr., decorated Reno PD sergeant, dead 5 years now, without ever forgiving his only son for choosing leather over a badge. The old man's last words still echoed, "You chose wrong, Jackson, and you'll regret it when you're my age." 54 years old, and that prophecy came true on a September afternoon, hot enough to shimmer on a street corner that smelled like exhaust and desperation, with a dying child's blood soaking through his jeans. Around them, the world exploded back into motion. Tires shrieked as the black sedan fishtailed around the corner, muzzle flashes still visible through rear windows. Return fire cracked from his brothers, spent brass singing against pavement. Someone shouted coordinates, another barked orders into a phone, and through it all, a woman's scream split the air like sheet metal tearing. The girl's mother surged forward, but Connor Axe Thompson caught her, his massive frame forming a wall between maternal desperation and the ugliness unfolding. Rachel Taylor fought him with everything she had, clawing at arms thick as fence posts, shrieking her daughter's name until her voice cracked and bled. Jackson didn't look up. His entire universe contracted to the 9-year-old under his hands, this kid who'd moved faster than trained instinct, who'd read violence in the tilt of a sedan window and decided in a heartbeat that his life mattered more than hers. He'd never even learned her name before she saved it. "Get the van," he snarled, not recognizing his own voice. "Move now." Tommy Wrench Patterson, road captain and getaway driver extraordinaire, didn't need telling twice. The battered Ford Transit they used for gear and occasionally unconscious prospects roared to life 30 feet away. Wrench drove it straight up onto the curb passenger door, flying open before wheels stopped rolling. Jackson lifted the girl like she weighed nothing, like she was made of glass, and wishes pressing his hands so tight against her shoulder he felt ribs shift under pressure. Her head lolled against his chest, leaving a smear of crimson across his club vest, right over the death's head patch that had defined him since he was 23 and stupid enough to think rebellion meant freedom. He climbed into the van's back. Rachel followed, or tried to, until Axe released her, and she scrambled inside on hands and knees. The metal floor hadn't been cleaned in months, still sticky from spilled beer and transmission fluid smelling like diesel and old cigarettes. None of it mattered. Wrench hit the gas before the door fully closed. Jackson cradled the kid Emma. He'd heard her mother call her Emma against his chest. His hand found the wound again, pressing down, despite the terrible wet give of torn flesh. Too much damage. Entry wound the size of a quarter exit wound that took half her shoulder blade with it, 9 mm hollow point designed to tumble and shred. If it had hit center mass like intended, he'd be the one dying right now. Small comfort when the alternative bled out in his arms. Rachel knelt beside him, hands hovering over her daughter, like she'd forgotten how to touch. Her whole body shook tremors, so violent her teeth chattered, despite 90-degree heat. Blonde hair had escaped its ponytail, hanging in her face, sticking to tears and snot, and the kind of anguish that breaks people permanently. "Emma, baby, stay with me." Her voice came out shredded. "Please stay with me." The kid's eyes fluttered again, unfocused brown, trying to find something solid to hold. Her mouth moved without sound, lips forming words Jackson couldn't read. He leaned closer, lowering his head until his beard brushed her forehead. "I got you, he whispered, not sure if he was lying. "I got you, little fighter. Just hold on." A gasp escaped her, tiny and hurt, and so goddamn young it physically ached to hear. But breathing meant alive. Gasping meant fighting. He'd take it. "How far?" The words came out too loud, bouncing off metal walls. 3 minutes. Wrench's knuckles showed white on the steering wheel, mine clenched so tight muscles jumped in his cheek. "Maybe 2 if these bastards get out of my way." They didn't. Wrench made them. The van jumped a curb, sideswiped a parked Camry, and blew through a red light at an intersection crowded with lunch-hour traffic. Horns blared. Someone's bumper kissed theirs with a crunch of plastic and chrome. Wrench kept the accelerator pinned, one hand on the wheel and the other reaching back to brace against whatever collision came next. Behind them, 4 motorcycles screamed in formation. Axe on his Harley Softail, Marcus Ghost Rivera on a Fatboy Jake Hammer Collins, astride a street glide, and Danny Dice Martinez bringing up the rear. They rode tight as fighter pilots, boxing the van and blocking traffic, clearing a path through Reno's downtown gridlock with the kind of precision that came from years running together. 2 prospects stayed behind to deal with cops, spin whatever story made sense, take the heat that was coming. Iron Scorpions started this war, rolled up on 2nd Street, with murder in mind and civilians in the crossfire. Witnesses saw everything. Security cameras caught it all. The law would sort it eventually once lawyers got involved, and everyone agreed on which version of truth to sell. None of that helped Emma. Her eyes opened fully for a second, clarity, returning in a rush that somehow felt worse than the glassy confusion. She looked at Jackson, really looked, and he watched comprehension dawn. She knew. This 9-year-old understood she was dying. Read it in the panic splashed across her mother's face and the desperate pressure of his hand, trying to hold her together through sheer force of will. Instead of crying, she smiled. Faint, pained, but undeniably a smile crinkling the corners of eyes too old for her face. "Mom." The word barely made it past her lips, just a breath with consonants. Rachel grabbed her daughter's hand, squeezing so hard Jackson heard knuckles pop. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. I'm sorry about the apples." That broke something in Jackson he didn't know could break. This kid was bleeding to death in the back of a van that smelled like failure, and she apologized for dropping groceries. For 2 pieces of fruit rolling across asphalt while gunfire painted 2nd Street in brass and blood. For existing probably because kids who grew up poor learned early that their presence was burden enough without adding accidents to the ledger. "Don't you worry about that." His voice came out rougher than he meant, gravel and cigarettes and 3 decades of bad decisions. "You just hold on. You hear me? Hold on, little fighter." Her gaze shifted to him, holding eye contact in a way that made his chest constrict. Kids weren't supposed to look at adults like that with understanding and forgiveness and something approaching peace. They were supposed to be scared and angry, fighting for every second, not accepting, never accepting. "Did I do good?" she whispered. "You did perfect." "Will you?" She coughed, wet and thick blood flecking her lips. "Will you really take care of Mommy?" Jackson hesitated. Half a second, maybe less, but enough for doubt to claw its way up his throat. Preacher's voice echoed from their argument 2 months back, when Jackson first mentioned helping that single mother whose water heater died. "We ride for each other, not civilians. Start blurring that line and you make us vulnerable." Wisdom earned through 50 years of outlaw life ignored because Jackson thought he knew better. Look where that got them. But this kid, this impossibly brave 9-year-old who'd thrown herself between a bullet and a stranger, deserved better than philosophical debate about club politics and who counted as family. She deserved a promise, even if keeping it cost him everything. I will. The words came easier than they should have. I swear on my father's grave, Emma. I'll take care of both of you. Her eyes closed. Not the fluttering half-consciousness from before, but the complete shutdown of a system conserving its last reserves for core functions. Her breathing went shallow, almost imperceptible, chest barely rising under his blood-slicked palm. "We're here," Wrench's shout barely registered. Renowned Regional Medical Center materialized through the windshield emergency entrance, bathed in fluorescent white that hurt to look at. Wrench didn't bother with designated lanes or parking spaces. He aimed the van at the ambulance bay and slammed brakes hard enough to throw everyone forward. Jackson was moving before they fully stopped. He kicked the door open, cradling Emma against his chest like she was made of spun glass. Blood soaked his shirt, his vest dripping from his elbows to splash dark spots on clean concrete. "Gunshot wound." His voice came out parade ground loud, the bark of command that made men jump. 9-year-old shoulder-heavy arterial bleeding. 10 minutes since impact. Automatic doors burst open. Medical staff poured out, a blonde doctor barely older than Jackson's hypothetical daughter, snapping orders as she ran. Someone shoved a gurney at him. His hands didn't want to let go, fingers locked around this kid who'd saved his life, some primal part of his brain screaming that releasing her meant losing her. Axe's hand landed on his shoulder, squeezing once. Permission. Release. Jackson laid Emma down as gently as his shaking hands allowed. The doctor cut through purple fabric with trauma shears, exposing the wound in all its terrible glory. Entry wound, front exit wound back, blood still flowing, despite everything, so much blood for such a compact frame. "What happened?" The doctor didn't look up, hands moving with practiced efficiency, pressing, gauze checking, pulse barking, orders at nurses who materialized from nowhere. "Drive-by. She took the bullet about 10 minutes ago, in and out of consciousness." "Are you family?" Rachel pushed forward, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "I'm her mother, Rachel Taylor. She's Emma Taylor. Please, please save her." The doctor's eyes flicked to Jackson, taking in the blood on his vest, the death's head patch, the prison tattoos creeping up his neck. Her expression stayed professionally neutral, but he read the calculation happening behind it. Biker, blood, child victim. Math that added up to guilty. "We've got her." The doctor's voice carried the kind of authority that ended arguments. "Wait here." They pushed Emma through doors marked authorized personnel only. Jackson caught one last glimpse of her hand hanging over the gurney's edges, fingers curled slightly like she was holding something invisible. Then the door swung shut and the waiting began. The ER reception area had that specific fluorescent hell glow that made everyone look 3 days dead. Jackson stood in the middle of it, blood drying stiff on his hands, ignoring stares from other patients and the security guard whose hand kept drifting toward his radio. His brothers filed in one by one, ignoring parking regulations and probably several traffic laws. They formed a protective circle around Rachel as she collapsed into a plastic chair that creaked under sudden weight. Her whole body folded inward, hands covering her face, shoulders, shaking with silent sobs that looked painful to contain. Axe crouched in front of her, speaking too low for Jackson to hear. Whatever he said made her nod, just barely accepting comfort from a man she'd never met before her daughter got shot. Wrench materialized at Jackson's elbow, road dust still coating his cut, sweat making tracks through grime on his face. "Cops are coming. They'll want statements." "Let them come." Wrench's tone shifted, dropping into the register reserved for club business and things civilians shouldn't hear. That was Damon Reeves behind the wheel. Iron Scorpions. "They were aiming for you, boss." Jackson had known the second he saw that black Dodge Charger, windows down and muzzles flashing. Damon Reeves, president of the Iron Scorpions, MC, escalating a territorial dispute that had been simmering for months into open warfare. Stupid, sloppy, firing into a crowded street in broad daylight with witnesses and security cameras everywhere. Also effective if their goal was hurting Jackson in ways that couldn't be stitched closed. "I know. They kicked off a war." "I know that too." Ghost approached from the left, his usual calm replaced by something harder, sharper. Sergeant-at-Arms, former teacher, the brother most likely to find peaceful solutions and least likely to start fights. Right now, he looked ready to burn the world down. Every single one of them, Ghost said, voice steady but carrying edges that could cut. We find every scorpion who was in that car, and we make them understand what happens when you miss. Jackson turned toward him, meeting eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Not yet. First the kid lives, then we handle business. The main entrance opened, and two uniformed officers walked in, scanning the room until their attention snagged on the wall of leather and patches. The older one approached eyebrows, climbing toward his receding hairline, like he already regretted whatever conversation came next. Jackson Steele, he pulled out a badge, flipping it open. Sergeant Patrick Walsh, Reno PD. Need to ask you some questions about the shooting on 2nd Street. Jackson bit back his first response that his given name hadn't mattered since his father died, refusing to acknowledge what his son had become. Reaper was the name that counted, the identity earned through 3 decades of riding and bleeding and building something his old man would never understand. That's me. Walsh pulled out a notebook, clicking his pen with the weary efficiency of someone who'd filled too many of these reports. Walk me through what happened. Before Jackson could answer, Rachel's voice cut through the room, hollow and sharp around the edges, like broken glass wrapped in silk. My daughter is in surgery. She stood wobbling, slightly pointing at Jackson with a hand that trembled so violently she could barely keep it raised. A 9-year-old girl is in surgery because someone tried to shoot him. Her finger jabbed accusation into the space between them. And somehow my little girl saw it coming. She pushed him out of the way. My baby took a bullet meant for a biker. The words hit the room like a physical force. Several people turned to stare. The security guard's hand moved from radio to sidearm, subtle but noticed. Walsh's pen stopped moving, attention shifting from Jackson to Rachel and back. Ma'am, I understand you're upset. Upset. Her laugh came out, broken, hitching on something that might have been a psalm or a scream. My daughter is dying because of him, because of his enemies, his choices, his entire goddamn life. She's 9 years old and she saw a murder coming and decided he was worth saving. Rachel's face crumpled, anger collapsing back into grief. She sat down hard, burying her face in her hands, and Axe was there, immediately placing himself between her and the room's judgment. Jackson stood frozen. Rachel's words carving trenches through whatever remained of his conscience. She was right. Every syllable true. Emma lay on an operating table right now because Jackson Steele existed, because he'd made enemies, because his patch drew violence like blood drew sharks. His father's voice whispered again, "You chose wrong." "I'm sorry." The words felt too small for the weight they carried, inadequate and insufficient, and the only honest thing he could offer. "There's nothing I can say that makes this okay. Nothing I can do that fixes it. But I'm sorry." Rachel didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge he'd spoken. She stared at the floor, at nothing, at whatever future she'd imagined for her daughter, dissolving into surgical lights and prayer. Walsh pulled Jackson aside, voice dropping to the register cops used when civilians were listening. "What happened? Who fired the shots? Did you recognize the shooters?" Jackson didn't dodge. Lying to cops was a reflex burned into outlaw DNA through decades of harassment and selective prosecution. But this wasn't club business. This was a kid bleeding out because grown men couldn't settle their differences without turning city streets into combat zones. Iron Scorpions, Damon Reeves behind the wheel, black Dodge Charger, tinted windows, plates probably stolen. They rolled up firing at least 6 shots, maybe more. "We returned fire. They ran." Walsh wrote it down, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "You're sure it was Reeves?" "Saw him clear as day." "And you're certain they were shooting at you specifically?" Scorpions want Reno territory, want control, business, respect. They've been pushing for months. This was their opening shot. "In the middle of downtown during lunch rush." Walsh shook his head. "That's spectacularly stupid." "Agreed. Also doesn't change the facts." Walsh flipped his notebook closed, studying Jackson with the particular expression cops reserve for criminals they couldn't quite pin down. "You know how this looks. Girl takes a bullet meant for the HELLS Angels president. You show up at the hospital covered in her blood. Every cop in the department's going to have questions. Let them ask. They will. We'll need detailed statements from everyone who was there. Your brothers, the mother, witnesses, security footage. Walsh hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, witnesses say the girl moved first. Say she pushed you, saved your life. That true? Jackson's throat went tight, remembering it, that impossible burst of speed, petite body slamming into his leg with enough force to knock him sideways. The crack of the gun, the way she spun blood misting in afternoon sunlight. Yeah, it's true. Walsh studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. Then maybe you owe her something more than an apology. He walked away before Jackson could respond, leaving that observation hanging in antiseptic air. The hours crawled past like years. Jackson stood sentry near the hallway leading to surgery, arms crossed back against the wall, ignoring the exhaustion creeping through his bones. His brothers rotated through in shifts, never leaving him alone, maintaining presence through sheer stubborn loyalty. Ghost brought burnt coffee from the cafeteria that tasted like regret and chemicals. Wrench disappeared and returned with clean shirts for everyone, though Jackson refused to change until he knew Emma survived. Wearing her blood felt like penance reminder carved into fabric of what his choices cost. Hammer showed up with food nobody ate. Dice tried to lighten the mood with card tricks that fell flat against the room's weight. Axe sat with Rachel, not speaking, just present, until she finally cried herself into exhausted silence. Around 7 p.m. is when the waiting room had mostly emptied, another visitor arrived. Vincent Preacher Kane moved slowly through the automatic doors, his cane clicking rhythm against linoleum. 68 years old, grizzled as winter, walking with the permanent hitch of a man who'd broken too many bones and healed them wrong. Founding member of the Reno Charter, original president, before he stepped down a decade back, the closest thing Jackson had to a father since his real one died disappointed. The brothers straightened unconsciously, decades of conditioning kicking in. Preacher commanded respect even without the title, even with gray in his beard and arthritis in his hands that made writing hell. He'd built this chapter from nothing, recruited. Most of the men here taught them what brotherhood meant, including Jackson. Preacher's eyes found him immediately assessing damage with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen brothers bleed out in every conceivable way. Heard what happened? Girl going to make it? Don't know yet. Still in surgery. Preacher nodded, lips pressing into a line that conveyed more than words. He studied the blood on Jackson's vest, the way it had dried, stiff and dark, mapping Emma's near-death and rust-colored geography. That's good. That's good that she's fighting. He paused, weight shifting off his bad leg. Now we need to talk about what comes next. Jackson's spine stiffened, recognizing that tone. The one Preacher used for difficult truths and unwelcome advice, for moments when sentiment had to yield to survival. What do you mean? You made promises to her, didn't you? To the girl and her mother. The question landed like accusation. Jackson had been careful, kept his voice low when he swore that oath, but Preacher had always been able to read him. 31 years of mentorship created bonds deeper than blood. She asked me to. She was dying a Preacher. What was I supposed to say? You were supposed to say nothing. Preacher's voice stayed level, patient, explaining an arithmetic to someone who kept getting the wrong answer. Reaper, I taught you 3 decades ago. When you first patched in, we ride for each other. Brothers first, last always. We don't ride for civilians. The moment you bring outsiders into the brotherhood, you make us vulnerable. She's a 9-year-old kid who took a bullet for me. She's a liability. Her mother too. They don't understand our life, our code, our enemies. You start helping them. You're going to bring heat cops, CPS media scrutiny, all the tension we've spent 50 years avoiding. This club survived by staying separate, by maintaining distance between our world and theirs. You're about to blur that line. Jackson felt Axe shift beside him, tension radiating off his VP like heat from asphalt. The other brothers watched silent, letting this play out, because challenging Preacher was like arguing with gravity, pointless and potentially painful. So would I just abandon them, pay her medical bills, and walk away? You pay for her medical care. Set them up somewhere safe, somewhere far from our world. Make sure they're taken care of. Then you walk away. That's the kind thing and the smart thing. I gave her my word. Preacher's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. Your word to a dying child doesn't override your oath to this club. I'm not trying to be cruel, Reaper. I'm trying to protect what we built. You want to be a social worker, quit the patch. But if you're wearing that death's head, you remember brotherhood first. Always. He turned to leave Kane striking floor with decisive finality. Axe stepped forward, voice low but carrying. He's wrong. Preacher stopped looking back over his shoulder. Am I will see. When the heat comes, when the complications start, when this decision costs us brothers, or freedom, or everything we've built, remember, I warned you. He walked out, leaving Jackson staring at empty space where his mentor had stood. Axe moved closer, broad shoulders blocking Jackson's view of the exit. He's wrong, he repeated. About all of it. Is he? What if bringing Emma into our world does make us vulnerable? What if I'm risking the club for one kid? Or what if she reminds us why we started writing in the first place? Freedom, yeah. Rebellion against a system that grinds people down. But also protecting people who can't protect themselves. When did we forget that? Jackson didn't have an answer. Maybe never forgot so much as stopped prioritizing. It stopped seeing civilians as anything except obstacles or opportunities. Stopped recognizing that the boundaries Preacher talked about between us and them, between brothers and burdens, were bullshit lines drawn by fear. Emma hadn't seen lines. She'd seen a man about to die and moved. Shouldn't that count for something? The surgical doors opened. The young blonde doctor emerged, still wearing blood-spattered scrubs. Exhaustion carved into the space around her eyes. Jackson and Rachel both lurched forward, hope and terror twisting together into something that hurt to feel. She's alive. Those two words hit like absolution, like redemption, like every prayer Jackson had never properly learned coming true, despite his lifetime of not deserving it. His knees went weak gravity, letting go for a heartbeat, the room tilting sideways before Axe's hand steadied him. The bullet missed major arteries by millimeters. The doctor continued, speaking quickly, clinically, probably repeating information she delivered 100 times. She lost significant blood volume, roughly 30%. We stabilized her, repaired the damage, closed both wounds. She's in recovery now, sedated, but vital signs are strong. Barring infection or complications, she should make a full physical recovery. Rachel made a sound that didn't have words, something between awe and gasp and laughter. Can I see her? Soon. She's still sedated, but she'll wake up in a few hours. We'll monitor her closely for the next 72 hours. Watch for signs of shock or infection. After that, if everything progresses well, maybe a week in the hospital, then outpatient care and physical therapy. The doctor's gaze shifted to Jackson, holding eye contact with the weight of unspoken judgment. She's incredibly lucky. A few more minutes of blood loss, and we couldn't have saved her. Getting her here that fast made the difference. Lucky. The word tasted like ash. Lucky would have been Emma never crossing his path, never being in the wrong place when Damon Reeves decided to start a war. Lucky would have been her spending this September afternoon doing homework or playing with friends instead of bleeding in Jackson's arms. But she was alive. Whatever else happened, however this complicated. Everything Emma breathed and her heart beat, and she'd wake up. That had to be enough. Rachel turned to him, face wet with tears that kept coming, fresh ones replacing dried salt tracks. Thank you. Her voice came out broken, rebuilt wrong. Thank you for getting her here. Jackson wanted to tell her the truth, that the only reason Emma needed saving was because he existed, because his patch made him a target, because violence followed him like a shadow. But Rachel already knew that. Everyone in this room knew that. She thanked him anyway. She's a brave kid, Jackson said, instead words feeling inadequate. Braver than most men I've ridden with. Something shifted in Rachel's expression, some small, complicated thing he couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with grief, appreciation tangled with anger. She'd lost her daughter for 10 minutes, watched her bleed and fade and nearly slip away. That wasn't something you got over just because the ending turned out okay. Then Rachel asked the question that had been waiting since Emma whispered those 3 words. Why did she do it? Why would she try to save you? Jackson thought back to 2nd Street, those seconds before everything exploded. Emma tripping apples, rolling her brown eyes, meeting his blue ones for half a heartbeat. Something had passed between them in that glance, some recognition or understanding he still couldn't name. Just a kid and a stranger. No history, no connection, no reason for what came next. Except Emma had seen him. Really seen him the way most people didn't bother looking at men in cuts. And maybe that was enough. I don't know, Jackson admitted. But I'm going to find out, and I'm going to make damn sure it wasn't for nothing. Rachel studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Permission granted or challenge issued? Maybe both. The next few hours blurred together. Cops came and went, taking statements, collecting evidence, photographing Jackson's bloodstained vest. Walsh returned with more questions, pushing for details about the Iron Scorpions, about territory disputes and escalation patterns. Jackson answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and watched the legal machinery grind into motion. Somewhere across town, cops were kicking down doors. Warrants executed arrests made evidence, bags filling with guns and drugs, and documentation that would keep prosecutors busy for months. The Scorpions had gotten sloppy, attacking in daylight, and now they'd pay for it. Jackson should have felt satisfied. Justice served enemies, punished, order restored. Instead, he felt hollow, exhausted, old in ways that had nothing to do with the 54 years his driver's license claimed. Around midnight, a nurse appeared and spoke quietly to Rachel. Something shifted in her posture, tension releasing like a drawn bowstring going slack. She stood smoothing wrinkles from jeans that would never come clean. She's awake. They'll let me see her now. Rachel walked toward the surgical wing, disappearing through doors that swung shut behind her. Jackson started to follow, then stopped. He had no right, no claim, just a promise made to a dying child and the weight of everything that promise implied. Axe appeared at his shoulder. You should go. I'm not family. You're the reason she's alive. Close enough. Jackson shook his head. I'm the reason she got shot. That's not the same thing. Boss, Axe's voice carried the particular firmness of someone who'd followed Jackson through hell and back, who'd earned the right to speak truth. Go see her. She asked you to take care of her mother. She deserves to know you're keeping that promise. 5 minutes later, Jackson stood outside Emma's room looking through the observation window at a scene that made his chest constrict. The kid lay small in a bed too big for her, swaddled in blankets and connected to machines that beeped steadily. White bandages covered her shoulders, stark against skin gone pale from blood loss. Her mother sat beside her, holding one hand, crying quietly. Emma's eyes were open, tired, drugged, hurting, but open and aware. Jackson pushed through the door, moving carefully, trying to make his bulk less intimidating in this space full of beeping monitors and chemical smells. Emma's gaze tracked him, and despite everything, the pain, the trauma, the fact that she'd nearly died, she smiled. Faint, fragile, but undeniably a smile. Hey there, little fodder. He kept his voice low, gentle. Everything his appearance suggested he couldn't be. How you feeling? It hurts. I bet it does. You took quite a hit. Jackson moved closer, his boots too loud against linoleum, until he stood at the foot of her bed. Emma watched him with eyes that held too much understanding. For 9 years, reading things in his face he tried to keep hidden. I'm Jackson, but people call me Reaper. You're Emma, right? She nodded, movement small and careful. Emma, I need to ask you something. He kept his tone respectful, treating her like a person whose answer mattered. Why did you do it? Why did you push me out of the way? Emma was quiet for so long he thought maybe the drugs had pulled her under. Then she spoke, words coming slow and thoughtful. You were going to do. I couldn't let that happen. But you didn't even know me. I was just some stranger. You looked at me. Her voice stayed soft but carried certainty that made his throat tight. When the apples fell, you looked at me and you weren't mean. A lot of people don't see me at all. Something twisted in Jackson's chest, recognizing the truth in that statement. He'd noticed it even then, in those seconds before violence erupted, the way Emma carried herself, compact and quiet, trying to take up minimal space. The body language of a kid who'd learned invisibility was safer than presence, who'd figured out that being seen meant being a burden. She'd been invisible her whole life until that moment on 2nd Street, when she decided being seen, being remembered, was worth dying for. I see you now, Jackson said, voice rough. I see you real clear, Emma Taylor, and I owe you my life. That's not the kind of debt that just disappears. Emma looked at Rachel, then back at Jackson. You don't owe me anything. Yeah, I do. A debt like that doesn't just vanish. He paused, glancing at Rachel before continuing. I'm going to look after you and your mom. Make sure you're safe. Make sure nobody lays a hand on either of you again. He watched Emma process that promise, seeing the want in her eyes, fighting against learned skepticism. Kids who grew up the way she had, poor, struggling, disappointing every adult who promised help, then vanished. They learned fast not to believe. Promises were currency that devalued through repetition. Okay, polite, careful. The answer children give when they don't know what else to say. But Jackson could see she wasn't letting herself hope yet. Fair enough, he'd prove himself through action, not words. That's what mattered anyway. Over the next 3 days, Emma's hospital room transformed. Flowers arrived in mismatched bouquets clearly purchased by men who wouldn't know a lily from a weed. Teddy bears piled up in the corner. Coloring books appeared. A Nintendo Switch materialized, and when Rachel tried to refuse it, Axe quietly mentioned it had been lying around the clubhouse unused. Emma wasn't fooled. Axe's face gave away the lie, but it was a kind lie, so she accepted with shy gratitude. The brothers rotated through her room like clockwork, never leaving Emma or Rachel alone for more than a few minutes. At first, Jackson thought they were standing guard, protecting against the possibility that scorpions might try finishing what they started. Then he realized they were doing something else entirely. They were learning her. Wrench came with automotive magazines and sketched engine diagrams on napkins, explaining combustion cycles and gear ratios, while Emma listened with fascination that clearly surprised him. Ghost brought fantasy novels from the library, stories about brave kids fighting monsters, asking about her favorite subjects and whether she liked school. Dice taught her card tricks, his rough, scarred hands moving with unexpected gentleness. Hammer showed up with bags of fast food, ignoring hospital rules because he knew Rachel couldn't afford to supplement the bland institutional meals. And Jackson came every day, sat in the corner like a guard dog, didn't say much, just stayed. He stayed through the nightmares too. Second night after surgery, Emma jolted awake around 2 a.m., gasping and crying, hands clutching blankets like they were the only solid thing in a tilting world. Rachel tried to comfort her, but the panic wouldn't release its grip. Jackson stood up from the chair he'd claimed, moving into Emma's line of sight. Her eyes, wild and unfocused, found his face and held. "You're safe," he said, steady and certain. "You're in the hospital. Nobody's shooting. Your mom's right here. I'm right here. Nothing's going to hurt you." It took 5 minutes before Emma's breathing slowed, before the terror bleeding off her in waves finally receded. She didn't go back to sleep, just lay there staring at the ceiling while Jackson kept vigil from his corner. In the morning, Rachel found him still there, awake, watching over her daughter like salvation was something you could enforce through pure stubborn presence. "You stayed all night." Seemed important. Rachel studied him with an expression he couldn't quite parse, confusion maybe, or the beginning of something that might become trust if given enough time. On the fourth day, Sergeant Walsh returned. He took statements, asked questions, wrote everything down with the methodical precision of someone building a case. He kept his face neutral, but Jackson caught the way he looked at the brothers, at the wall of leather surrounding Emma's bed. Something between suspicion and reluctant respect. "The men who did this," Walsh said, carefully addressing the room, "are in custody. We picked up Damon Reeves and 5 iron scorpions at their clubhouse this morning. Found weapons, drugs, enough evidence to put them away for a long time." "All of them?" Jackson asked. "Every member who was in that charger, along with most of their leadership." Walsh held Jackson's gaze a second too long. "Funny thing, though, their clubhouse got shot up last night. Anonymous tip led us there. Found them scrambling, destroying evidence, making mistakes." Jackson didn't react, didn't need to. Walsh had been a cop long enough to read between lines to understand that justice came in multiple forms, and the law only caught what it was allowed to catch. 4 days was a long time in the outlaw world. Conversations happened, decisions got made, lines got drawn. Walsh turned to Rachel next. "The district attorney wants to speak with Emma when she's well enough. Her testimony is important." "She's 9 years old," Rachel snapped, exhaustion fraying into anger. "She shouldn't have to relive this." "I know, but she's not just a witness. She's the victim. What she says matters." Emma spoke up from the bed, voice stronger than it had been since the shooting. "I'll do it. I'll tell them what happened." Rachel tried to protest, but Jackson lifted a hand, subtle gesture requesting patience. "That's brave, Emma. Real brave. But nobody's forcing you, okay? This is your choice." Emma thought about it, taking her time, exercising agency in a life that hadn't given her much. She'd had so few choices: where they lived, what they ate, whether the lights stayed on. But this she could control. I want to, she said firmly. I want to help. Walsh nodded, finished his paperwork, and left. The official police presence walked out, but the unofficial protection stayed right where it was. That evening, as Rachel dozed in the chair beside the hospital bed, Emma watched Jackson from beneath heavy lids. He felt her attention, looked up from his phone to meet her gaze. Reaper. Her voice came out small, careful. Yeah, kid. When I said take care of mommy, did you think I was dying? His face went still. She deserved honesty, not comfortable lies. I did. Were you scared? Yeah. The admission came easier than expected. I was terrified. I've seen a lot in my life, Emma. Things I wouldn't wish on anybody. But holding you while you bled out, that was the worst of it. Emma absorbed that processing in the way children do when adults treat them with respect. I'm sorry I scared you. Jackson's voice came out rougher than he meant. Don't you dare apologize. You saved my life. You got hurt protecting someone you didn't even know. That's nothing to be sorry for. That's something to be proud of. Emma wasn't sure she believed that she hadn't felt brave, just certain, but she liked the way he looked at her. Like she mattered. Like she was someone worth saving. Do you think the bad men will come back? No. Jackson spoke with absolute certainty built on knowledge Emma was too young to understand. They won't. They're locked up, and even if they weren't, they'd have to get through me and 40 of my brothers first. That's not happening. Why? Her voice came out smaller than she meant. Why do you care so much? You don't know us. Jackson leaned forward, resting elbows on knees, meeting her eyes dead on. I've been riding with the angels for over 3 decades, Emma. I've seen the worst of what people can do. Violence, greed, selfishness, men who'd hurt anybody if it meant getting what they wanted. He paused, letting truth settle. And then I watched a 9-year-old girl throw herself in front of a bullet for a stranger. You reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten existed: pure, selfless courage. That's not the kind of thing a man like me just walks away from. Emma took that in, feeling something warm unfurl in her chest, something that had been curled up tight for years. My dad left, she said suddenly, 3 years ago. He said we were too much work, that he didn't sign up for being poor and struggling. So he just left. Jackson's jaw tightened, anger flaring hot and immediate for a man he'd never met. Then your dad's a coward and a fool. Because you and your mom, you're fighters. You're worth 100 of him. Mom works all the time. We never have enough money. I try to help, but I'm just a kid. You're not just anything. You're extraordinary. And things are going to have to change for you and your mom. I promise you that. There it was again. Promise, but this time Emma believed him. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the weight of his attention. This wasn't a man who made promises lightly. On the 5th day, they released Emma with instructions for pain management and physical therapy. Rachel signed paperwork, collected prescriptions, accepted follow-up appointments. The brothers loaded them into Axe's truck. Rachel in front, Emma carefully secured him back, Jackson following on his bike. They drove to the small efficiency apartment above the laundromat on 4th Street. 1-bedroom kitchenette, bathroom, barely big enough to turn around in. Rent $300 a month, utilities extra, everything worn and stained and falling apart. Home. Jackson took it all in with a single sweep. The water-damaged ceiling, the window that wouldn't quite close, the ancient refrigerators that hummed loud enough to wake the dead. Emma's corner had a twin mattress on the floor, a milk crate serving as a nightstand, and clothes folded neatly in cardboard boxes because dressers cost money they didn't have. This was where they'd been living when Emma decided his life was worth saving. Over the next week, things changed. Wrench showed up unannounced and fixed the toilet that had been leaking for months, then installed new locks on the door and windows. Ghost appeared every Friday with groceries, fresh produce, real meat, food Rachel hadn't been able to afford in years. Hammer took Emma to her physical therapy appointments when Rachel was stuck at work, sitting through every session with patient quiet. Dice came by to continue magic lessons, teaching misdirection and sleight of hand, building Emma's confidence through small successes. The Angels had also arranged for Rachel to transfer to a better restaurant. The Golden Spoke out on the highway connected to some friends of theirs. Rachel suspected those friends were more like silent owners, but she didn't ask questions. Not when the tips were better, and the hours let her see Emma more than 12 minutes a day. 6 months of rent got paid in advance. Medical bills evaporated before they could hit collections. Emma's school got a generous donation that happened to cover all her fees and supplies. But the money wasn't what changed things most. It was the presence. These men who society called criminals, who wore death's heads and broke laws, who lived outside respectable boundaries, they showed up. Every day, consistently, building trust through action instead of words. One evening, Jackson arrived to find Emma and her mother eating dinner at the small kitchen table. Spaghetti from a box, sauce from a jar, but more food than they'd had most nights before 2nd Street. "Come in," Rachel called, waving him toward the table. "We have plenty." Jackson hesitated, aware of his size in their small space, of how his presence filled rooms, and intimidated without intention. But Rachel smiled, genuine, not forced, and Emma scooted her chair over to make room. So he sat. They ate together, three people who shouldn't have become family, but somehow were. Emma talked about school, about a math test she'd aced because Ghost helped her study. Rachel shared gossip from the restaurant customers who tipped well and ones who didn't. Jackson mostly listened, learning them, memorizing details that mattered. After Emma went to bed, Rachel and Jackson sat on the narrow balcony that overlooked 4th Street's minimal traffic. The November night had teeth cold enough to make breath visible, but neither of them moved to go inside. "I don't understand you," Rachel said, finally, a voice quiet. "You and your brothers, you're outlaws, criminals. The cops treat you like you're dangerous. The news calls you violent. But you've been nothing but kind to Emma, to me. Why?" Jackson took his time answering, choosing words carefully. "I won't lie to you. We break laws. We do things that could get us locked up if the cops could prove it. We live outside what people consider normal." He paused, meeting her eyes. "But we have rules, a code. And the most important one is simple: we protect our own." Emma's not an angel. She became one the moment she took that bullet. That makes her family. That makes you family. And I'm not sending her back to struggling, to being invisible, to wondering if there'll be food tomorrow. That's not happening. Not on my watch. Rachel studied him in the dim light spilling from the apartment behind them. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's family taking care of family." He saw the fight in her eyes: pride, independence, fear of depending on anyone, especially men. But beneath all that, exhaustion. Years of it. Choosing between bills, skipping meals, watching her daughter go without because life kept kicking them, and they had no one to help them back up. "What do you want in return?" Rachel asked. "What's the catch?" Jackson had been waiting for this question since the hospital. "No catch. But if you need terms, that you let us keep you safe. You let us help with rent until you are steady. You let Emma spend time with men who'd die before letting anyone hurt her again." He paused, then added, "And maybe once in a while you cook dinner for a bunch of idiots who live on takeout and terrible choices." Despite everything, Rachel laughed. Small sound surprised out of her, but genuine. "That's it. That's all you want. That's all. To be part of your family, to watch Emma grow up safe, to give you both what you deserve." Rachel looked across the balcony at her daughter's window, where Emma slept without nightmares for the first time since the shooting. Her shoulders were loose, her breathing even. She wasn't scared. "Okay," Rachel whispered. "Okay." That one word changed everything. 2 weeks later, Jackson stood in Reno Memorial Cemetery under gray November sky that threatened rain. He'd avoided this place since his father's funeral, 5 years of guilt and anger keeping him away. But tonight he needed to be here, needed to say things that should have been said when the old man still drew breath. Jackson Steele Sr.'s headstone was simple granite engraved with the basics: name dates, loving father, dedicated officer, man of honor. Nothing about his son, nothing about disappointment. The absence spoke volumes. Jackson knelt in dead grass knees, protesting, and placed his palm flat against cold stone. "Dad," his voice came out rough, unused to this kind of honesty. "I know you died thinking I was a thug, criminal, waste of an MIT education and everything you sacrificed to give me. Your last words to me were, 'You chose wrong, Jackson, and you'll regret it when you're my age.'" Cold wind carried dead leaves across empty graves. "Well, I'm 54 now, your age when we stopped speaking. And you were right about some things. The life I chose brought violence, brought enemies. 3 weeks ago, a 9-year-old girl got shot because of my choices, my patch, my existence." He swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "But that same kid saved my life without thinking twice." Really saw me when most people just see the cut and the tattoos. And now I'm going to spend however many years I have left proving that your son wasn't the waste you thought he was. That honor isn't about following rules, it's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Jackson stood, joints creaking, hand lingering on the headstone. Her name is Emma Taylor. She's 9 years old. She's braver than any man I've ridden with. And she believed I was worth saving when you couldn't. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm going to be the man you wanted me to be, Dad. Just in my own way. Watch me. He turned to leave and found Axe standing 20 feet away, giving him privacy, but close enough to hear. His VP didn't say anything, just nodded once. Acknowledgement. Respect. They rode back to the clubhouse together, engines drowning out words neither needed to speak. Spring crawled into Reno like a promise half-kept, bringing wildflowers to desert edges, while leaving the city itself gray and unforgiving. 6 months since the shooting. Emma turned 10, surrounded by 40 leather-clad men singing off-key in the Angels clubhouse, their voices bouncing off concrete walls decorated with decades of history patches from defunct chapters, photos of brothers long gone, and now taped prominently above the bar, Emma's crayon drawing of a purple motorcycle. The kid had gained 15 pounds of healthy weight color, returning to cheeks that had been hollowed by poverty and near death. Her shoulder moved freely now, physical therapy successful enough that she barely favored it anymore. But the real transformation showed in how she carried herself, shoulders back instead of hunched, voice clear instead of whispered, eye contact steady instead of averted. Jackson watched her tear into birthday presents with joy so open it hurt to witness. Not the careful gratitude of a child afraid gifts came with conditions, but genuine delight that someone had paid attention to what she loved. Wrench presented professional art supplies in a wooden case, hinges still stiff with newness. Heard you're pretty good at drawing. These are real tools, not kid stuff. Ghost gave her a stack of books, 3 grades above her reading level. You're already reading ahead. Time to challenge that brain. Dice produced an elaborate magic set, professional grade, then immediately started teaching her the basics while other brothers crowded around to watch. Axe handed over a leather jacket custom-made to fit her slight frame. Hell's Angels rocker, across the back, scaled down but unmistakable. Emma slipped it on running fingers over stitching, done by hands that had sewn patches for decades, and something fundamental shifted in the room's atmosphere. She wasn't just protected anymore. She was claimed. Jackson's gift came last, a silver locket on a delicate chain. Emma opened it to find a photo of herself and Rachel on one side, the other empty. For the family you choose, he told, her voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. So you always remember where you belong. Emma threw her arms around his waist, hugging with strength that surprised him. He rested one scarred hand on her head, feeling pieces of himself he thought were broken beyond repair, somehow knitting back together. Rachel stood beside the makeshift bar Ghost had stocked with juice boxes alongside the usual beer, watching her daughter shine. When she caught Jackson's eye, something passed between them. Understanding maybe, or the beginning of something neither could name yet, but not everyone celebrated. Vincent Preacher Kane's absence hung in the room like smoke, obvious to anyone paying attention. 12 other brothers had also failed to appear, empty spaces at the long tables where they usually sat. Viper Cruz leaned against the far wall, present physically, but radiating disapproval, arms crossed and jaw tight. Emma noticed. Kids always noticed when adults performed rejection, even silent ones. She found Jackson later as the party wound down, tugging his sleeve with insistence. Why didn't everyone come? He'd been dreading this question for 3 weeks since the divide within the club started showing cracks. Some people had other things to do, little fighter. They don't want to be here because of Mate. Not a question. Statement of fact delivered with the blunt clarity children weaponize when they've learned to read subtext. Jackson knelt, bringing himself to her eye level. It's not about you, sweetheart. It's about change. Some people would rather keep things the way they've always been. Even if the way things were wasn't good. The kid cut straight to bone every single time. Especially then. Change is scary, Emma. These men have ridden together for decades. They know how things work. Then you come along and remind them of things they forgot or never learned. That's hard. Emma processed this with the seriousness she brought to everything important. What if they leave? Then they leave. Jackson kept his voice firm, certain even as doubt clawed at his certainty. But I'm not letting you go. Not for anything. She hugged him again tighter this time, and over her shoulder, Jackson caught Axe's worried expression. His VP had been tracking the growing rift, documenting which brothers still showed up and which found excuses. The math was getting ugly. 2 weeks after Emma's birthday, the other shoe dropped with the weight of inevitability. Rachel's phone rang at 11 p.m., jarring them both awake from the easy rhythm they'd fallen into. Jackson stopping by most evenings, sharing dinner, helping Emma with homework, teaching her about engines, while Rachel learned to trust again. She answered, listened, then went absolutely still in a way that made Jackson's instincts scream danger. There's a town hall tomorrow night about motorcycle clubs and community safety. Her voice came out flat, affect stripped away. My boss called, said some customers have been complaining. They've seen me with the angels. They're uncomfortable. Jackson felt ice spread through his chest. What did he say? That I should come to the meeting, speak for myself, or distance myself from you. Rachel looked at him, eyes holding exhaustion that went bone deep. He didn't say I'm fired, but I heard it anyway. The Golden Spoke had been good to her, better tips, reasonable hours management that didn't harass the staff. Losing it would hurt, send her back to juggling multiple jobs, struggling to make rent even with the angels' help. You don't have to go, Jackson said quietly. You don't owe them explanations. Don't I? Something sharp entered Rachel's tone edges, showing through carefully maintained composure. I live in this town. Emma goes to school here. We can't just ignore what people think. People think lots of things. Doesn't make them true. Rachel stood pacing the apartment like caged energy needed outlet. They think you're dangerous. They think I'm putting my daughter at risk. They think. She stopped, turning to face him. What do you want me to say, Jackson? That they're completely wrong, that there's no danger in Emma spending time with outlaw bikers. The question hit like accusation, and Jackson couldn't dodge because she was right. Couldn't pretend the shooting never happened, that Emma's scar didn't exist, that his world wasn't built on violence, an illegal enterprise and codes that conflicted with civilian law. I want you to tell them the truth, that we've kept you safer than you've ever been, that Emma's thriving, that family doesn't always look how people expect. And if they don't believe me, if I lose my job anyway, Jackson held her gaze, letting her see the commitment carved into every line of his face. Then we figure it out, together, like family does. Rachel wanted to believe him. He saw the war in her eyes, the part that trusted fighting, the part that remembered every man who had promised help, then disappeared. But she nodded, compact motion that cost her something to give. The community center's auditorium packed to capacity the following evening, 200 citizens crammed into seats designed for 150. Jackson arrived with his full chapter 43 brothers filing in wearing their cuts, despite the hostile attention it drew. They sat in the back, a wall of leather and defiance, and watched Reno's concerned citizens organize their fear into policy recommendations. Carol Jennings from the school board spoke first, reading from prepared notes with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her moral authority. We have a situation where a 10-year-old child regularly associates with convicted criminals. Whatever the circumstances of their initial meeting, this sets a dangerous precedent. What message does this send our children? That violence is acceptable, that criminal lifestyles should be celebrated. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jackson felt Axe tense beside him, fists clenching, but his VP stayed silent. They'd agreed beforehand, let the civilians have their say, respond with facts instead of intimidation. Officer Frank Morton took the podium next, and Jackson recognized him from the hospital. Older cops seen enough to have perspective, but still bound by institutional thinking. The Hells Angels have been investigated multiple times for drug trafficking, weapons violations, and assault. While major convictions have eluded prosecution, their lifestyle fundamentally conflicts with family-friendly community values. We've seen increased angel presence at schools, medical facilities, public spaces. This creates legitimate safety concerns. More murmurs. The audience was building toward consensus, collective judgment, forming like storm clouds. A business owner Jackson didn't recognize stood up without waiting to be called, voice carrying accusation. They're bad for business. I own the diner on 3rd Street. Used to do good lunch rush. Now people see motorcycles parked outside and turn around. My revenue's down 30% since word got out they're regulars. Rachel sat 3 rows ahead of the angel's spine, straight, hands folded so tight her knuckles showed white. Jackson watched her absorb every criticism, every fear, every judgment that landed because she'd chosen to trust him. Then someone said the thing Jackson had been waiting to hear. What about the Taylor girl, Emma? A mother Jackson recognized from parent-teacher conferences Emma had mentioned. She's in my daughter's class. My daughter came home saying she wants to join a motorcycle club when she grows up. This is inappropriate role modeling for children. Rachel stood before Jackson could stop her, and the room's attention swung toward her like a weapon. My name is Rachel Taylor. Emma is my daughter. Pin drop silence. Every eye in the auditorium fixed on the woman standing alone facing a room full of judgment without backup except the brothers at her back she couldn't see. Jackson watched her hands shake, watched her force steadiness into her voice through sheer will, and felt something in his chest expand. 6 months ago, my little girl was shot. She took a bullet protecting someone she didn't know. She almost died. Rachel's voice gained strength, trading fear for anger that had been building since the phone call. And the men you're calling criminals, they saved her life, drove her to the hospital, paid medical bills I couldn't afford, made sure we had food safety support. Everything. Ms. Taylor, Jennings interrupted, condescension dripping from every syllable. You're financially dependent on them. You're not objective. You're right, I'm not objective. I'm grateful. Rachel's hands unclenched, anger fully replacing fear now. I'm grateful that when my daughter needed help, these men showed up. That when we had nothing, they gave without asking for anything back. That when everyone else saw us as invisible, they saw us as family. She turned, making eye contact with sections of the crowd, forcing them to see her as human instead of abstract problem. You want to talk about role models? These men have taught my daughter about honor, courage, and keeping your word. About standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. About what family really means, not blood, but choice. But you don't see that. You see patches and assume the worst. Morton tried to interject, but Rachel rode over him, momentum building. You're judging them without knowing them. You see motorcycles and leather and think danger. But I see men who protect the vulnerable, who keep promises, who've changed my daughter's life. Who've changed my life. Her voice cracked slightly, exhaustion showing through. Yes, they ride motorcycles. Yes, they wear leather. Yes, they have pasts. But they're also veterans, business owners, people who've made mistakes and are trying to be better. That's more than some of you can say. Rachel sat down hard, energy spent, and for 5 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then Jackson stood, and the room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. He moved down the aisle slowly, deliberately, letting his size and presence do work before words. People leaned away, instinctive recognition of apex predator, even in suburban setting. He stopped beside Rachel's row, not sitting, commanding attention through pure physical dominance. My name is Jackson Steele. Most of you know me as Reaper. I'm president of the Reno HELLS Angels. His voice carried to the back without shouting. Parade ground projection learned from his cop father decades ago. Everything Rachel said is true. We have pasts. We've broken laws. We've made choices society doesn't approve of. He let that settle, watching faces harden with confirmation of their fears. But I'll tell you something else. Every man in this room wearing that patch would die before letting harm come to Emma Taylor. We've changed because of her. She made us better, reminded us what we're supposed to be about, not just rebellion, not just freedom, but protecting people who can't protect themselves. Jennings started to speak, but Jackson kept going, not aggressive, just immovable. We're not going anywhere. We're part of this community, whether you like it or not. We pay taxes, own businesses, employ people, and we're going to keep protecting Emma and Rachel. You can accept that or fight it. Won't change the outcome. He sat beside Rachel, close enough she felt his presence as anchor, and met the eyes of anyone brave enough to hold his gaze. The meeting continued another 90 minutes, arguments, counter-arguments, procedural votes that meant nothing. The council decided to monitor the situation without taking action, bureaucratic cowardice dressed as measured response. Outside afterward, Rachel's boss approached with the apologetic expression, Jackson had seen on dozens of faces before bad news delivered. Rachel, I'm sorry. Corporate heard about tonight. They're worried about image. I can't have you back. She nodded like she'd been expecting it, face carefully blank. I understand. The man walked away and Rachel stood there staring at nothing, processing the fact that defending the Angels had cost her the best job she'd had in years. Jackson heard the conversation, rage building slow and hot. He stepped forward, but Rachel put a hand on his chest, stopping him. Don't, it won't help. You just lost your job defending us. I know. She looked up at him, eyes dry but carrying weight. And I'd do it again. I meant what I said in there. I'd rather stand with you than stand with people who judge without knowing. Something shifted between them, then invisible but fundamental. Rachel closed the distance, rising on her toes, and kissed him. Quick, firm, claiming. When she pulled back, her expression held defiance. We'll figure it out, she said, echoing his words from 2 nights ago. Together. Behind them, brothers watched. Some smiled. Others, Viper prominent among them, looked disgusted. The real explosion came 3 days later. Church meetings that normally drew only officers, but when Jackson walked into the clubhouse that evening, he found the entire chapter assembled. 43 men in a room designed for 20, tension thick enough to choke on. Vincent Preacher Kane sat at the head of the table. Not his seat anymore, hadn't been for a decade, but nobody had challenged him. Preacher's cane rested against the table edge, both hands flat on scarred wood that had witnessed 50 years of decisions. We need to talk about what happened at that town hall, Preacher said without preamble, about where this club is going. Jackson took his seat, axe on his right, feeling the room divide along invisible lines. Brothers who'd been coming to the apartment, helping Emma with homework, bringing groceries, they sat on his side of the table. Brothers who'd been scarce, who found excuses not to show up, they clustered near Preacher. Say what you came to say. Preacher's expression held no anger, just disappointment that cut deeper. You stood in front of the entire town and apologized for who we are, explained ourselves, justified our existence to civilians who have no right to judge us. I stated facts. You showed weakness. Preacher's voice stayed level, patient, explaining simple mathematics. We're outlaws, Reaper. We don't bend to society. We don't apologize for our choices. We don't let civilians dictate how we live. But that's exactly what you did. Viper leaned forward, adding his voice to the prosecution. That woman stood up there and talked about how we've changed, about how we're trying to be better, like we were broken before, like we needed fixing. Rachel was defending us, Axe growled. Rachel was painting us as reformed criminals trying to earn society's approval. That's not who we are. We're wolves, not lapdogs begging for scraps from the table. Jackson felt control slipping, the carefully maintained unity he'd built over 15 years as president, fracturing along fault lines he'd ignored. Nobody's begging for anything. We're protecting a kid who saved my life. You're letting that kid change everything this club stands for. Preacher's hands pressed harder against the table, knuckles white. Brothers are leaving Reaper. 12 men have told me they're considering taking their patches off if this continues. If we keep blurring lines between us and civilians, if we keep letting women and children dictate club policy. The number hit like a gut punch. 12 brothers, more than a quarter of the chapter. I didn't join this club to be social workers, Viper added. Didn't patch in to play house with some kid and her mother. I ride free. That's what the Angels are supposed to be about. Ghost spoke up from Jackson's left, voice calm but carrying steel. Nobody's stopping you from riding. But we're also not abandoning Emma. She took a bullet for one of us. That means something. It means she's brave, Preacher acknowledged. Doesn't mean she's an angel. Doesn't mean we owe her our entire way of life. The room erupted into arguments, brothers shouting over each other, decades of riding together dissolving into accusations and defense. Jackson let it run for 2 minutes before slamming his fist on the table hard enough to make beer bottles jump. Enough. Silence crashed down, broken only by heavy breathing and the scrape of chairs. Jackson stood slowly, letting his presence fill the space. Preacher's right about one thing. This is changing us. Emma reminded us what we're supposed to be, not just rebels, but protectors. Not just tough, but good. That scares some of you. I get it. Change is terrifying. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each brother. But I'm not apologizing for protecting her. Not to this town, not to you, not to anybody. She's family. Rachel's family. They've proven it. And if that makes us weak in your eyes, then maybe we were never as strong as we thought. Preacher stood using his cane for leverage, and the room tensed. I'm invoking Founding Charter Article 7. When a president's actions endanger the club membership, may call vote of no confidence. Axe shot to his feet. Preacher, you can't. I can and I am. This needs to be decided. Either we follow Reaper into whatever this becomes, or we choose a different path. The words hung like execution orders. Vote of no confidence was nuclear option, rarely invoked, never lightly. It meant questioning everything leadership direction, the fundamental nature of brotherhood. Jackson looked at his mentor, the man who'd recruited him 3 decades ago, who'd taught him what it meant to be an angel, who'd shaped him into the leader he'd become. They'd ridden through hell together, buried brothers, side by side, built this chapter from nothing into something that mattered. Now Preacher wanted it back. Fine, call the vote. Preacher's face remained expressionless, but something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or vindication. All those in favor of vote of no confidence in Jackson Steele as president, raise your hand. Hands went up. Preacher's symbolic, since he'd given up his vote years ago. Vipers immediately. Then 10 more scattered around the table, brothers who'd ridden with the Jackson for years, making their choice clear. 12 hands, 12 votes against him. Axe wrench ghost dice, hammered. His core officers kept their hands down. So did 28 others, brothers who'd watched Emma transform from scared kid to confident fighter, who'd seen Rachel stand alone in that town hall, who'd been reminded what protecting the vulnerable felt like. Motion fails, Jackson said quietly. 31-12. Preacher nodded slowly, absorbing defeat with the same patience he brought to everything. Then he did something Jackson never imagined possible. He removed his patch. 48 years of membership, 5 decades of brotherhood, the founding of this very chapter. All of it represented by the death's head on his back. Preacher reached behind himself, pulled the rocker free with careful reverence, and placed it on the table between them. I'm done, Reaper. Done watching you destroy what I built. Done pretending that going soft is the same as being good. Done. He looked at Viper and the 10 others who'd voted against Jackson. Brothers who want to ride with men instead of babysitters are welcome to join me. Viper stood immediately, removing his patch. 4 others followed: Santiago, Mac, Pete, and young Tommy. 5 patches joined Preachers, lying there like accusations. 7 more hesitated, caught between loyalty to their president and the old ways Preacher represented. Jackson watched their internal war, saw the moment they chose comfort over change. 7 more patches hit the table. 13 men total. 13 brothers walking away because Jackson chose a 9-year-old girl over tradition. Preacher picked up his cane, started toward the door, then paused. When this costs you everything, when the heat comes, when complications destroy what's left, remember I warned you. They left. 13 brothers who'd been family, gone in the time it took to cross a room. The door closed. Silence pressed down like a physical weight. Axe broke it, first voice rough. Boss, what just happened? Jackson stared at the patches on the table, each one representing years of brotherhood, of riding together, of blood spilled and enemies faced. 13 empty chairs at church meetings from now on. 13 brothers who'd rather abandon him than accept change. I just lost my mentor. And 12 others. Ghost moved to his side. You made the right choice. Did I? Jackson picked up Preacher's patch, running fingers over worn leather and faded stitching. He founded this chapter. Forgot more about being an angel than I'll ever know. And I drove you out. He drove himself out, Wrench said firmly. Couldn't accept that times change. That we can be better. What if he's right, though? What if I am making us weak? A small voice from the doorway cut through his doubt. You're not. Every head turned. Emma stood there in her pajamas, Rachel behind her, both of them having arrived during the argument. Emma must have heard everything through the thin walls Jackson kept meaning to soundproof. She walked toward him, compact and determined, navigating through brothers who parted like water. When she reached the table, she picked up Preacher's patch with both hands. You're the strongest person I know, she said, looking up at Jackson with absolute certainty. And you know why, because you're not afraid to care. That man is afraid, that's why he left. How do you know that? Emma thought for a moment, choosing words with the careful consideration she brought to important things. After I got shot, I was so scared all the time. Scared of loud noises, scared of strangers, scared of losing mom. And you told me being scared is okay, but running away because you're scared, that's when fear wins. She held up the patch, this 9-year-old girl holding 50 years of history like it weighed nothing. He's running away. You're not. Jackson took the patch from her, feeling the weight of it, the history stitched into every fiber. Then he set it down carefully, reverently, and pulled Emma into a hug that probably hurt her healing shoulder, but she didn't complain. Thank you, little fighter. Over her head, he met Rachel's eyes. She'd heard him get ripped apart, watched the club fracture, seen him lose brothers he'd ridden with for decades. And she'd stayed, brought Emma to remind him why he'd made these choices. The remaining brothers gathered closer, forming new unity around the loss. 30 men now instead of 43, smaller chapter, weaker by traditional metrics. But somehow holding Emma while his brothers closed ranks, Jackson felt stronger than he had in years. The next few days tested that strength. Word spread through Reno's outlaw community. The Angels split, Preacher gone 13 brothers, following him into whatever came next. Rival clubs circled like sharks, smelling blood, testing boundaries, pushing limits, seeing if the weakened chapter could still hold territory. Jackson and Axe spent 18-hour days riding fence lines, showing face, making it clear that losing 13 men didn't mean losing heart. They settled disputes, collected debts, reminded everyone that the Reno Charter still existed and still had teeth. But nights Jackson came back to the apartment above the laundromat, sat with Emma while she did homework, ate dinner Rachel made with ingredients Ghost still brought every Friday. Let himself believe that choosing this family vulnerability, caring about someone beyond brotherhood, wasn't the weakness Preacher claimed. Then Derek Taylor showed up, and everything got infinitely worse. The knock came at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, aggressive and entitled the kind of pounding that assumed the right to demand attention. Rachel opened the door to find a man she'd spent 3 years trying to forget, standing in cheap suit, with practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Derek Taylor looked exactly like the coward who'd walked out, slicked hair cologne, masking cigarette smoke, the hollow charisma of someone who'd confused charm with character and never learned the difference. Hello, Rachel. She tried to close the door. His foot blocked it, expensive shoe wedged in the gap, and behind him a news van idled at the curb, with camera operator already filming. You don't get to be here. Rachel's voice came out steady, despite the panic crawling up her throat. I have a right to see my daughter. You gave up that right when you abandoned her. Derek's smile widened, empty and calculated. I made a mistake. I want to fix it. Want to be part of Emma's life again. Emma appeared behind Rachel, sleep-tousled and confused, registering her father's presence with the blank incomprehension of a child who'd spent 3 years erasing someone from her narrative. She'd been 6 when he left, 9 when she took that bullet. Now 10, and Derek was a stranger wearing familiar DNA. Emmy, Derek's voice went syrupy, performance for the camera. You've gotten so big. Emma said nothing, just pressed closer to her mother, making herself smaller, in ways she hadn't done since before the shooting. Rachel felt her daughter's fear like physical touch, the regression of all their progress in the space of 30 seconds. Get out, Rachel said louder now. I'm her father. I have rights. Derek pulled out his phone, scrolling with theatrical casualness. Been following the news. My little girl, a hero, saved a biker's life. Got herself shot. His tone shifted, sugar replaced by steel. Must have been traumatic. Good thing I'm back to provide stability. Rachel's hand found Emma's, squeezing tight. What do you want? What I've always wanted, my family back. Derek glanced at the camera, making sure it caught his next words. To protect my daughter from the dangerous environment she's been living in. Behind them, a motorcycle rumbled to a stop. Jackson arrived for their usual Saturday breakfast, taking in the scene with combat-sharpened instinct. News van? Strange man, Rachel's defensive posture, Emma hiding. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, letting his size and presence do preliminary work. Derek tracked his approach with calculation that suggested homework done, weaknesses identified. So, you're the famous Reaper, the guy my daughter took a bullet for. Jackson stopped 3 feet away, close enough to intimidate without threatening. Derek Taylor. That's right, Emma's father. The person who actually has legal rights here. Rights you abandoned 3 years ago. Derek's smile never faltered. Temporary lapse in judgment. I'm back now, going to fight it for my daughter. You don't want Emma, you want money. That's a serious accusation. Derek gestured to the camera. I'm just a father trying to reconnect with his child. Jackson read the play instantly, Derek positioning himself as concerned parent against dangerous biker building narrative. For custody battle, probably planning to monetize Emma's story through book deals or movie rights. The kind of parasitic opportunism that made Jackson's hands curl into fists. Every instinct screamed to put Derek on the ground, show him what happened to men who threatened Emma. Would take 3 seconds. One punch, problem solved. But the camera watched, and putting Derek down would prove every accusation, validate every fear. The town hall had voiced give preacher vindication and cost Jackson everything. So he stepped back. You'll get your day in court, Jackson said, voice level, despite rage turning his vision edges red. Until then, stay away from her. Derek's smile widened, sending victory. See you in court, Reaper. He got in his rental car news van following and drove away. Rachel sagged against the doorframe like strings had been cut. Emma pressed against her side, both of them trembling. Jackson moved closer but didn't touch, giving them space to decide whether his presence helped or hurt right now. He's going to try to take her, Rachel whispered. I know. He's going to use you against me. Say Emma's in danger because of the angels, because of what happened. He's going to take my daughter. Her voice cracked on the last word, composure shattering. Jackson wanted to promise it wouldn't happen, that he'd protect them, that Derek would fail. But Rachel was right. Derek had legal standing, biological claim, and ammunition in the form of Emma's gunshot wound and the angel's reputation. A judge might actually rule in his favor, despite 3 years of absence. We'll fight him, together, and we'll win. Rachel looked up at him, eyes holding desperation that bordered on despair. How he's her biological father. I'm a single mother who lost her job defending a motorcycle club. Emma got shot because of you. How do we fight that? Jackson had no answer that didn't sound like hollow reassurance, so he stayed silent and waited for Rachel to cry herself out while Emma watched with 2 old eyes. 3 days later, Derek filed emergency custody modification. His lawyer, expensive suit, practiced smile, same empty charisma as his client built a case around Emma's dangerous environment, Rachel's poor judgment, and the angel's violent history. The petition claimed Derek had reformed to achieve stability and wanted to provide normal family environment. Translation, he had found temporary housing in Carson City, gotten a job through connections that wouldn't last, and constructed paper trail of fake responsibility. Jackson convened church meeting with his remaining 30 brothers, spreading Derek's filing across the table like battle plans. He's going for custody, using our reputation against Rachel, painting us as threat to Emma's safety. Ghost studied the documents, former teacher's analytical mind parsing legal language. He's also been contacting talent agents. Emails here about selling Emma's story, My Daughter the Hero, book deal, possible movie adaptation. He doesn't want Emma, he wants to monetize her trauma. Then we prove it, Axe said. Show the judge what he really is. Wrench leaned back, arms crossed. How we dig into his background, we look like thugs intimidating civilians. We threaten him. We prove his point about being dangerous. The room fell silent. 30 men who'd solved problems through force and intimidation suddenly hamstrung by legal system designed to protect people like Derek. Jackson felt the frustration like physical weight. Every solution involved violence or coercion tactics that would destroy their case. They needed different weapons, and none of them knew how to fight battles where fists didn't matter. We hire investigators, Ghost suggested. Legal ones, private detectives who can document Derek's history, employment, gambling debts, the agent contacts. Build evidence the right way. That takes time, hearings in 6 weeks. Then we use what we have. Rachel testifies about his abandonment. Emma tells the judge who she wants to live with. We document everything the angels have done, medical bills, paid groceries, provided Emma's improvement in school and health. Hammer looked up from his phone, face grim. There's something else. Derek's been doing interviews. Local news podcasts, anyone who'll listen. Telling his version, reformed father trying to save daughter from gang influence. He turned his phone around, showing news article, Father fights for daughter living with outlaw bikers. The accompanying photo showed Derek looking concerned and sincere, Emma's school picture cropped to show her scar. Jackson's jaw clenched hard enough, his teeth ached. Derek was controlling narrative, painting himself as hero, while the angels couldn't respond without looking defensive or guilty. We need someone who can tell our side, someone the community respects. Axe's eyes narrowed in thought. What about Preacher? The suggestion landed like bomb in quiet room. Preacher who'd walked out, who'd taken 12 brothers, who'd called Jackson weak for protecting Emma. He won't help us, Jackson said flatly. You sure? Because he lost a grandson. Sent the kid away to keep him safe, and it destroyed their relationship. Emma's situation might remind him of that. Jackson wanted to dismiss it, but Axe had a point. Preacher's opposition hadn't been about Emma specifically. It had been about fear, about losing what mattered, because caring made you vulnerable. That was experience talking, bitter wisdom earned through failure. Maybe he'd see Derek differently. Maybe the anger would point outward instead of in. I'll talk to him, Jackson said, already dreading the conversation. He found Preacher at the old dive bar on Highway 80, sitting alone with whiskey and regret. The older man looked up when Jackson approached, expression unreadable. Heard about the custody case. Jackson sat without invitation. Derek's using us against Rachel. Going to take Emma if we don't stop him. Preacher sipped his drink slowly. And you want my help? I want you to testify. Tell the judge what you told me about your grandson. About how fear makes men do stupid things. How you chose the club over him and regretted it forever. Something flickered in Preacher's eyes, old pain surfacing. That's a hell of an ask. You want me to bleed in court for the kid whose existence split our chapter? I want you to stop another man from making your mistake. Derek's going to take Emma and monetize her story. Use her. Hurt her. And she'll grow up thinking nobody wanted her enough to fight. Preacher was quiet for a long time, staring into amber liquid like it held answers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight of years. Mikey was 8 when his parents died. Car accident, drunk driver. I was supposed to take him, raise him. But the club was in the middle of territory war with the Diablos. Dangerous time. Bodies dropping, feds watching. I told myself he'd be safer with his aunt in Oregon. He paused, grip tightening on the glass. Truth was, I was scared. Scared of failing him. Scared of losing him like I lost his mother. Scared of caring that much about someone who wasn't a brother. Preacher's voice cracked slightly. So I sent him away. Told him it was temporary, that I'd bring him back when things settled. But you never did. Never did. War ended. Feds backed off, and I still kept him away because I'd gotten used to not hurting, not worrying, not loving. He drained his glass, signaling for another. Mikey grew up hating me. Thought I abandoned him, didn't want him. He was right. When he died 5 years ago, overdose, never got clean. His last words to me were, you taught me nothing matters except being tough, so I became tough. And it killed everything good in me. Jackson let the silence hold, giving Preacher's grief space. When I saw you with Emma, Preacher continued, I saw myself with Mikey, and I got scared again. Scared you'd fail her, scared caring would cost you everything, scared of watching another man choose wrong. He looked up, meeting Jackson's eyes. But you're not choosing wrong, you're choosing what I couldn't, love over fear. And I tried to stop you because I'm a coward who learned nothing. You're not a coward, you're scared, there's a difference. Is there? Preacher laughed bitterly. I'll testify. Tell the judge what happens when men choose safety over love, when they let fear make decisions. He paused. But I want my patch back. Want to come home, if you'll have me. Jackson didn't hesitate. Your patch never left. It's still on the table waiting. Something eased in Preacher's expression, decades of tension releasing. Then let's go get your daughter her family back. The custody hearing happened on cold morning in late April courthouse, steps slick with yesterday's rain. Rachel arrived wearing her only professional outfit, Emma, in church dress. Someone had donated, both of them looking slight and scared. Derek showed up with his lawyer and practiced expression of concerned fatherhood news crews, documenting his arrival like he was celebrity instead of deadbeat dad. Inside, Judge Martha Reynolds presided with the weary efficiency of someone who'd seen every variation of family dissolution. She reviewed the filings, studied Emma's medical records and school transcripts, then addressed the room. This is emergency custody modification hearing. Mr. Taylor seeks primary custody of his daughter Emma, currently living with her mother Rachel Taylor. Let's begin. Derek's lawyer went first, painting picture of dangerous environment and Emma's gunshot wound, the Angels' criminal history, Rachel's unemployment and dependency on outlaw motorcycle club. Witnesses testified the diner owner who'd fired Rachel Carol Jennings from school board, repeating concerns about inappropriate role models, Officer Morton discussing gang violence statistics. The evidence mounted each testimony, building narrative of irresponsible mother and dangerous surrogate family. Then Rachel's lawyer, Robert Chen pro bono through Angels Connection, presented their case. First came financial records documenting Derek's gambling debts, 12 jobs in 3 years, current housing, in weekly rate motel. Then email correspondence with literary agents about selling Emma's story marketing plans that treated her trauma as commodity. Your Honor, Chen said, Mr. Taylor doesn't want custody. He wants money. He sees his daughter's heroism as business opportunity. Derek's lawyer objected, but the emails spoke for themselves. Derek squirmed in his seat, practiced composure, cracking. Rachel testified next, voice shaking but determined. She described 3 years of Derek's absence, no calls or support or acknowledgement that Emma existed. Detailed the Angels' help, medical bills, paid groceries, delivered Emma's transformation from scared, invisible child to confident fighter. They gave us family when we had nothing, Rachel said, looking directly at the judge. They showed up every day. That's more than Derek ever did. Then Jackson took the stand and the courtroom's energy shifted. Derek's lawyer attacked immediately. Mr. Steele, you're president of an outlaw motorcycle club investigated for numerous criminal activities, correct? We've been investigated, never convicted on major charges. But you admit to illegal activity. I admit to living outside conventional boundaries. That's not the same as hurting people. Emma was shot because of you. Your enemies targeted you and she got caught in crossfire. How is that not hurting her? Jackson absorbed the hit, refusing to flinch. Emma saved my life. I didn't ask her to, didn't expect it. But she chose to protect me, and I've spent every day since keeping the promise I made her to take care of her and her mother. That's what family does. You're not her family. You're a criminal she barely knows. I'm the man who held her while she bled out, who stayed with her through surgery, who shows up for homework and nightmares and parent-teacher conferences. Biology doesn't make Derek her father. Showing up does. The lawyer tried another angle. Your club recently split. You lost multiple members over Emma. Doesn't that suggest your involvement with her is problematic? It suggests change is hard. Some brothers couldn't accept that we could be better. They left. The ones who stayed understand what Emma taught us, that real strength is protecting the vulnerable, not pretending we don't care. Derek's lawyer kept pushing, but Jackson held ground, answering every question with steady certainty that caring about Emma wasn't weakness. Then Chen called unexpected witness. The defense calls Vincent Kane. Murmur rippled through courtroom as preacher stood walking to witness stand with his cane, wearing his patch, again for first time in weeks. Derek's lawyer looked confused, clearly not expecting testimony from an angel who'd publicly split from Jackson. Chen established preacher's credentials, founding member, 50 years in motorcycle clubs, witnessed every variation of outlaw life. Mr. Kane, you recently left the Reno charter over their involvement with Emma Taylor. Why are you here today? Preacher looked at the judge, then at Emma sitting beside her mother. Because I was wrong about Emma, about what protecting her means. Can you explain? 32 years ago, I had a grandson, Mikey. His parents died and I was supposed to raise him. But I was scared of failing him, scared the club's violence would hurt him, scared of caring that much. So I sent him away. Preacher's voice roughened. Told myself it was protective. Really, I was a coward. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Mikey grew up hating me, thinking I didn't want him. And I didn't want the responsibility, the vulnerability, the fear that comes with loving someone that much. He died 5 years ago, never knowing I cared. Preacher wiped his eyes unselfconsciously. When Jackson chose Emma, I saw him making my mistake, thought caring would destroy him, weaken the club. So I tried to stop him. What changed your mind? Watching him refuse to walk away even when it cost him brother's reputation everything. Realizing he was doing what I couldn't, choosing love over fear. Choosing to be strong enough to care. Preacher looked directly at Derek. That man wants custody because Emma's profitable. Jackson wants her safe because she's family. That's the difference. Derek's lawyer stood. Objection. This is emotional manipulation, not relevant testimony. Judge Reynolds studied Preacher for a long moment. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Kane. Your Honor, I've spent 50 years in motorcycle clubs, seen the worst humanity offers. But what Jackson and his brothers are doing for this little girl, that's the best. Don't punish them for it. Don't let this coward, he pointed at Derek, take her because he smells money. Emma deserves better. Chen let that sit, then called his final witness. The defense calls Emma Taylor. Emma walked to the stand looking terrified, hands clutching something wrapped in construction paper. Judge Reynolds smiled gently, trying to ease her fear. Emma, do you know why you're here? Yes, ma'am. Derek wants to take me away. And how do you feel about that? Emma looked at Derek, then at Jackson, then back to the judge. I don't want to go with him. I want to stay with Mom and my dad. Derek's lawyer jumped on that. Your Honor, she's confused. Mr. Taylor is her biological father. I'm not confused, Emma said, voice gaining strength. Derek is my father because of DNA, but Reaper's my dad because he shows up. She unwrapped the construction paper, revealing handmade book crayon drawings, careful kid handwriting pages stapled together. I made this. Can I show you? Judge Reynolds nodded, curious. Emma opened the book, displaying each page while describing it. Page 1 showed the shooting in childish but vivid detail. Page 2 depicted hospital room with Jackson holding her hand. Subsequent pages showed homework, help birthday party brothers, teaching her things Rachel and Jackson and Emma together as family. Near the end came page showing empty chair at dinner table. This is where Derek would sit if he ever showed up, but he never did. Final page showed all the angels surrounding Emma in protective circle, crude but powerful representation of chosen family. Family isn't who you're born to, it's who chooses you every day. Judge Reynolds read the entire book, taking her time, occasionally wiping her eyes. When she finished, she looked at Emma with expression that held understanding. Emma, this is beautiful. You made this yourself. Yes, ma'am, I wanted you to understand. The judge looked at Derek, then Jackson, then back to Emma. I understand perfectly. She called, recessed, disappeared into chambers for 30 minutes that felt like years. When she returned, her expression held decision. I've presided over hundreds of custody cases. Most involve two biological parents fighting over a child. This case is different. She looked directly at Derek. Mr. Taylor, you are Emma's biological father, but biology doesn't grant custody. Parenthood is earned through consistent presence, sacrifice, putting the child's needs first. You failed to do that. Derek's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. The evidence shows you abandoned your family 3 years ago, provided no support, financial or emotional. Your sudden return coincides suspiciously with Emma's media attention, and your communications with literary agents prove your motivation is financial, not paternal. She turned to Jackson. Mr. Steele, your lifestyle concerns me. Your club's recent instability concerns me. But what I see clearly is a man who has consistently shown up for this child, who has sacrificed reputation, membership, and stability to keep a promise. Finally, she addressed Emma. And this young lady has spoken eloquently through her testimony and through this remarkable book. She knows who her family is. Judge Reynolds picked up her gavel. My ruling, full custody remains with Rachel Taylor. Derek Taylor's petition is denied. All parental rights terminated. Mr. Taylor is ordered to cease media contact regarding Emma and prohibited from monetizing her story in any form. Rachel sobbed. Emma sat very still, processing. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm expediting adoption proceedings for Jackson Steele. Emma deserves legal recognition of what she already knows: he is her father. In 30 days, Emma Taylor will legally become Emma Steele. Court adjourned. The gavel fell. Derek erupted, shouting objections, but security escorted him out. His lawyer followed, already calculating appeals that wouldn't succeed. Outside, Rachel hugged Emma so tight the kids squeaked. Jackson stood back, giving them a moment, until Emma pulled away and launched herself at him. "We won," she whispered. "You won. That book, that testimony, that was all you, little fighter." Preacher approached, slowly stopping a few feet away. "Congratulations. You did good." Jackson extended his hand. Preacher took it, and something fundamental healed between them. "Come back to church tomorrow. Got a chapter to rebuild." Already planning on it. Over next 3 days, 8 of the 12 brothers who'd left with Preacher returned sheepish and apologetic. Viper and 3 others stayed gone, started their own small chapter in Carson City, pride preventing reconciliation. Jackson let them go without anger, understanding some men couldn't bend. 30 days later, the same courthouse hosted adoption ceremony. All 38 brothers attended wearing clean cuts, bringing respectful solemnity to proceedings. Community members filled remaining seats. Morton the cop, Chen the lawyer, even Jennings from school board come around after watching Emma's courage in court. Emma wore her purple dress and leather jacket, holding Rachel's hand on one side and Jackson's on the other. Judge Reynolds smiled as she read the order. "Emma Rose Taylor, from this day forward, you are Emma Rose Steele. Mr. Steele, you are now her legal father. Congratulations to this beautiful, unconventional, extraordinary family." Gavel fell and the courtroom erupted in cheers. Outside, 38 motorcycles lined the street. The reunited Chapter Plus preachers returned brotherhood whole again, minus the few who couldn't change. They formed convoy escort engines, rumbling triumph riding through Reno, while Emma sat on Jackson's bike, grinning so wide her face hurt. People waved from sidewalks. Shop owners stepped out to watch. Kids pointed excitedly. The angels weren't feared anymore. Respected, maybe. Understood, definitely. All because one girl decided a stranger was worth saving. 6 months after adoption, Jackson stood in Reno Community Center for ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Angels had partnered with City Council for youth outreach program, scholarships for at-risk kids mentorship, through brothers who'd learned protecting the vulnerable mattered more than maintaining reputation. First annual Emma Steele Youth Courage Award, the banner read. Preacher spoke his voice, carrying authority earned through 50 years of living hard and learning late. 50 years ago, I helped found the Reno HELLS Angels. We were outlaws, rebels, men's society rejected. He paused, looking at Emma standing with her family. But we forgot why we started writing to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. A girl named Emma reminded us. She saved our president's life, and in doing so, she saved all of us. Emma presented the first scholarship to Marcus Thompson, 14-year-old kid from rough background she'd been tutoring. The brothers had given him job at their shop, shown him that mechanics and honor could coexist. That evening, Jackson found Rachel and Emma on their balcony, bigger apartment now, safer neighborhood, Rachel managing books for 3 angel-owned businesses. But they'd kept the balcony tradition. Sunset painted Reno in gold and purple, Emma's favorite colors. "Dad," she still tested the word, sometimes savoring how it felt. "Do you ever think about that day, the shooting? Every single day." "Do you wish it never happened?" Jackson thought carefully, choosing honesty over comfort. "I wish you never got hurt. Wish you never had to be scared. But I don't wish we never met. That moment changed everything. Gave me a family. Gave me purpose. Reminded me who I wanted to be." Rachel took his hand, fingers lacing together with easy familiarity. "Gave all of us a second chance." Emma leaned against him, content and safe. "Preacher told me something yesterday. He said I saved your life twice. Once with my body, once with my heart." "What did he mean?" "First time you pushed me out of the way of a bullet. Second time you showed me how to live instead of just survive." Showed all of us. Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "Then we saved each other, because you showed me the same thing." Jackson pulled her close. This kid who'd transformed from invisible to essential, who taught nearly 40 outlaws that real strength meant caring enough to be vulnerable. "Yeah, little fighter, I guess we did." Inside the apartment, framed photos lined the mantle. Emma, 9, in hospital, surrounded by brothers. Adoption day, with her on Jackson's shoulders. Recent picture of Emma, Rachel, Jackson, and Preacher on bikes together, all smiling. One more photo sat beside them. Newer, the entire chapter at Community Center. Ribbon-cutting Emma front and center, wearing her leather jacket, 38 men behind her standing, not as gang, but as family. Jackson had spent 3 decades trying to prove his father wrong about choosing the outlaw life. Turned out he'd been answering the wrong question. It wasn't about proving the choice right. It was about making the choice mean something. Emma meant something, family meant something, being strong enough to care meant everything. His phone buzzed, Axe texting about church meeting tomorrow, routine business. Nothing urgent, just brotherhood continuing, evolving, choosing to be better because a 9-year-old girl taught them how. Jackson looked at his daughter legally, his now not just in heart, but in law, and his woman who'd chosen to trust despite every reason not to, and his brothers who'd stayed when leaving was easier. This was the life his father never understood, the one Jackson spent 3 decades building without knowing what he was building toward. Turned out salvation wore purple and took bullets for strangers and reminded grown men that protecting the innocent wasn't weakness. It was the whole point.